Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on what's new in direct sourcing. So we're going to be covering AI-powered talent pools, new operating models, commercial models, and emerging trends in this sector. I'm your host, Connor Heaney. Thanks so much for joining us. A warm welcome to all of our guests today. Just some brief background on me. I'm the president at CXC Global EMEA. I also host an award-winning podcast, The Open Talent Report, and I'm the dad of two great girls who are now aged 8 and 5. So, guys, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks so much for your support for our webinars over the last number of years, particularly in relation to direct sourcing. I'm delighted to be joined by longtime collaborator and friend on the webinars, but also a key strategic partner of CXC, Saleem Khaja, who is the Chief Operating Officer and Co-Founder at WorkLlama. Saleem, a warm welcome to you. Do you want to give our guests just the benefit of your experience?
Yeah, thanks, Connor. Thanks for having me again on this podcast. Yeah, I'm a person who's obsessed with technology and been doing different things with technology for the past, 30 years or so. I know we put 25, I've gotten older since this was put together. I'm the co-founder and CEO of WorkLlama, based out of Atlanta. And continuing in style of Connor, I have two boys who are almost in college. So thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us. And I think the direct sourcing market has seen so much change. It's had a whole host of, I think, issues and challenges around naming conventions and confusion in the marketplace. And I think our intention today is to bring some clarity to that, and we're really excited to talk about that today. We really welcome all questions, guys. I think the last webinar we did, we ran out of time. We got so engrossed in the conversation, so we'll make sure that we have 15 minutes dedicated for question and answers. Again, a warm welcome to you. Please submit any questions that you have via the form, and also if you have any questions during the webinar, please share it via the chat. Our colleague Pete Botto is monitoring the chat, and thanks to Pete for doing that. Ankush, you've got a question. Maybe if we can come back to that at the end, please, or please drop it into the chat. We're recording the webinar, so just to let you know that. And please put a fun fact about yourself into the chat. And of course, enjoy the webinar. So here's what we're going to be covering today. What's new in direct sourcing? The role of technology in direct sourcing. It's great to have Saleem here for that. Best practices for direct sourcing implementation, and questions and answers, which we're really looking forward to answering today. So, Pete, if you could move on to the next slide, please, I'd be really grateful. So, Saleem, we're just doing a preparation call before the start of the webinar, and Saleem, guys, was drilling me with lots of questions, and it's nice to be able to turn the tables now. So, Saleem, how is the current global landscape influencing direct sourcing adoption? Because I've got a view in this. I'm not sure I've got any quantitative evidence for this. This is all anecdotal, but it strikes me that direct sourcing has a slower adoption curve, particularly in Europe, but a much faster adoption curve in the United States. That's what I'm seeing, right? And I'd be keen just to get your response to that question, and also my view on the matter. Thanks, Salim.
Yeah, so let's kind of first define what are some of the global trends in the talent landscape, right? So if you follow a lot of the research that's being published around and leaders talking about it, you'll hear about 5 key trends, right? One is there's a significant skill gap, which actually is amplified because of the pace at which AI is taking over, right? And then you have a shift in focus on skill-based hiring models, right? So then the next trend that you're seeing globally has to do with the advancements in technology that are used for direct sourcing or anything related to talent, right? And then obviously there are other elements like changing demographics, which drive need for workforce agility, evolved employee experience, and the age-old challenge still continues, right? Which is shortage for quality talent, right? So if you look at all of these 5 trends, then in order to address majority of these, direct sourcing becomes a good solution, right? So one of the things that you do with direct sourcing is build your own branded private talent communities, right? It's not going out to the market and buying 500,000 resumes at 1/10 of a penny per resume, right? This is about building a talent community that is relevant to you and to your organization, right? So if you start looking at it, then your talent community not just comprises of external talent, it comprises of your internal talent. It comprises of talent that comes from freelancer marketplace and any other sources that you have, right? So the way you look at, one of the trends in the global landscape, which is focused on skill-based hiring, is the talent communities you build and the talent pools that you build and nurture are skills-based, and then you're driving upskilling and other aspects within this talent community that is relevant to you, right? Again, it's critical that this talent community and talent pool is yours and is not 500,000 resumes that gets shopped around to 20 other companies, right? So, organizations, because of these global trends, what we are seeing in direct sourcing is organizations are starting to become a lot more aware of how to build the talent communities, what it means, right? And also leveraging technology to do this more effectively and efficiently. I know we are going to drill deeper into technology as we go into the next slides, right? So going back to one other trend that we didn't touch upon is the changing demographic of workforce. There's research that recently came out, north of 16% of people in the workforce are now prefer to be freelancers or gig workers. And I think part of the return to office mandate is also going to push more people towards that. That's still to be proven, but if you look at how people have gotten used to working over the past few years, and then you layer in the demographic of workforce, that is another trend. And again, you can enable a lot of that through direct sourcing because you're building a talent community of contingent workers, right? So that's kind of how I look at the global trends and how they map to direct sourcing and what we are starting to see in the space.
And Salim, you raise a couple of fascinating points there on the demographic side of things. So, as I understand it, based on some of the research I've undertaken, the birth rate and the labor force are inextricably linked. I'm feeling the so what test here for our audience, but in short, in the United States and in most Western European labor markets, the birth rates have been falling over about a
Mm-hmm.
55 to 60 year period. And the net result of that is that there's less people available in the labor market in Western Europe and also in the United States. And then the, 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 in addition to that, we're seeing increased regulations around migration or immigration, which is also having an
Mm-hmm.
impact on labor force and labor force availability. So in that context, Liam, are you seeing from the enterprise buying community a recognition that the talent can be outside that particular company's borders and that the talent community is essentially a global talent community that they can own, manage, redeploy, re-engage, and essentially keep warm and upskill? Or is there a recognition and a willingness to look at that now in your experience, Celine?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, right. And and one of the things about a distributed global workforce, um, it's a lot of conversation is being had about it, but if you think about it, a lot of the companies had a distributed workforce, right? I mean, most of the engineering and development work was centered around India. Now it's expanding into Far East, right? And then other countries. So organizations always had such a model, But I think the degree of comfort when it comes to global talent communities of contingent workforce, right? People are now seeing, hey, it worked for me on the perm side. If I effectively manage it with, good technology and proper oversight, I can still have a global community, and my workforce can be anywhere, right? Which means one is technology, and the other is you need a right curation and recruiting partner, right? That ensures you're successful in doing that.
Yeah, I think that human and tech combined is a really
Mhm.
compelling proposition. Saleem, this is something that I'm sure our audience have thought about and we've discussed before, but it strikes me that maybe direct sourcing has had a problem with its naming convention or its name. And I know we talked about this last year.
Yeah.
Certainly, we talked about this about 4 years ago when there was a huge amount of market noise around direct sourcing. But it strikes me that maybe we could have a different name for it, and it might increase its adoption or might move up the adoption curve. What's your take on it?
No, I absolutely agree. And a lot of the work we did last year, working with industry leaders like yourselves that do webinars and podcasts, as well as SIA, is to basically educate the market on what the solution is, right? It doesn't matter what label someone puts on it because it is convenient to them based on what they're capable of doing, right? Don't let that be what the solution is, right? For example, someone just doing recruiting services with a existing legacy database that may be refreshed or not refreshed, and calling it direct sourcing is not what direct sourcing is, right? If they use the term, hey, I'm directly sourcing, right? I'm directly talking to a candidate and placing them on assignment, then it's not direct sourcing, right? Like we talked about when we talked about the global trends, it's a private talent community of curated talent that is purpose built for you so you can rapidly react to changing market demands and hire quality talent in a timely manner, right? I mean, that sounds like a mouthful of words, but that is what it is. And it's not as complex, right? If you look at the 5 key pillars of what a direct sourcing solution should be, which is what we've been professing to the industry, right? It is talent marketing, it is curation, which is not recruiting, right? Making sure you have ready to deploy talent that's nurtured, um, you are upskilled to meet your demands, right? So you have marketing, curation, recruiting, which is something everyone knows. Then you have UR, AOR services, and then the technology stack, right? If anyone's talking to you about direct sourcing, and we'll get to what it needs to be called, right? And not addressing each of these areas and showing a level of proficiency in what these are, then it is just the label someone is using, right? We heard all these terms where um, it's a low cost staffing. Which it is not, right? So absolutely, because the word makes it so easy to confuse and throw in different models. It's not direct sourcing. So yeah, I mean, a good friend of ours who's an industry leader, I didn't ask him if I could name him, so I won't, has called this contingent RPO a few times, right? And again, I think we need to come to consensus on if that really makes sense, because the moment you say contingent RPO, a recruiting outsource firm in maybe somewhere in India may say, hey, I'm doing direct sourcing, right? So whoever does these 5 key pieces in a solution is what we are today labeling as direct sourcing. Contingent RPO is a step in the right direction, but it needs to have a better and different name. I don't know what it is. Maybe we do a poll.
I think that's a good idea. Salim, I think the 5 steps or processes that you've outlined that describes and I think defines direct sourcing, I fully agree with. And I think the unfortunate thing for for end user companies or enterprises, whether they're small, medium, or large, the ideal state is about when they want to get talent, they should be getting it not just in time, but first in time. But invariably, in my view and in our experience, and I'm sure some of the our guests today on the webinar will be nodding their head. I hope so, going, well, actually, we get our bloody talent last in time. We don't get the talent we need. The talent we need probably exists within our organization. And I think for me, that's the beauty of what I would describe as true direct sourcing, as you've described it, Saleem. It's about that speed, right? Speed to redeploy, speed to re-engage, speed to hire, because the way you've described it, not only will that talent be known, but it will be vetted, right? She, he, or they will be background checked. They'll be job ready, so to speak, because they've went through their compliance journey as part of that process to go into the talent community or during that process. And for me, that's where the beauty is in direct sourcing. And I think where the power of direct sourcing comes from is in the technology. And I think that's what we should move on to next, Salim, if that's okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, as you're transitioning, Connor, one thing, right, building on what you said, it is your talent, it's your talent community, right? You own the talent community, which also means, right, it is, like you said, right, it's access to quality talent in an expeditious manner, but we shouldn't forget about the cost benefits, right? You're not paying 50%, 40%. Yeah, I mean, I've received messages after stating this comment in different webinars. You're not paying different markups for different role types and skill types. It's your talent community. You're just going and hiring the person, so your cost basis is going to be the same, right? And I think that's a key aspect that that gets often overlooked when you're thinking about the solution. Sorry, just to take you
No,
back to
no,
the
Salim, I think that's a fair comment and something perhaps we can focus on. And I think going back to the adoption piece, so looking at adoption rates in the United States versus adoption rates in Europe, and I think to some of our procurement colleagues and friends that might be on the call today, in Europe, they've done a really good job over the years of driving down recruitment and staffing
Mhm.
fees. And I think
Yeah,
back to
yeah.
my early career, and it's hard to believe I've nearly been in this sector 20 years. I can't believe it myself, right? And shout out to the Kiehl's moisturizing brand because they're bloody brilliant. But in all, in all seriousness, I remember starting my staffing career in 2006, 2007, and I think the staffing fee or margin for JP Morgan at that time was in the region of around 7%, right? So that's essentially
Mhm.
nearly 20 years ago, right? So imagine what it is now. I don't think it's went up in that time period. So I think I think on a pure play comparative cost basis, it doesn't always work so well in more mature labor markets like Europe. And then when you look at the United States, I think, my goodness, some of the staffing vendor
Mhm.
recruitment markups off
Yeah.
over there are off the charts. And when I was starting my
Mhm.
career, I would have loved access and to be privy to that. And I think that's where it really begins to stack up. But on a general basis, I agree with you, Salim. I think the cost benefit is there, right? And
Yeah.
if the adoption is there and the change management, the change readiness, and the
Mhm.
resources are available on the client side or the buyer side, then you've got a really compelling proposition, in my view.
Yeah, I mean, we can continue just talking about this
Yes,
forever, right? Well,
why not?
one key, no, we'll move to the next one because it's technology. It's relevant to me. One last comment here, right, is some of the staffing firms that are progressive in their thinking kind of realize what's going to happen to the staffing business itself, right? Because it's technology is going to make a big change. We'll talk about it in the next slide, right? So they are starting to switch towards becoming more of a solutions companies. If you start looking at the bigger companies, they're gradually shifting themselves and rebranding and repositioning themselves as solutions companies. So why is that? Right? You should be asking.
I think my own view on that is it's to do with the commoditization of
Yeah.
staffing, right? And that, those large human capital or staffing companies have huge capital an operating
Mhm.
expenditure base, right? I mean, that some of them are in the 25 billion plus category or 20 billion
Yeah.
category, but their cost base is about 24 billion, right? And that's because they've got huge offices and huge infrastructure cost. And, companies like yours can just come in and I wouldn't say eat their lunch, but certainly disintermediate the sector. And I think that's an interesting observation and one that I would agree with, Salim, based on my read of the market.
Companies like us help them improve their margins. We don't steal their lunch. We let
Yes.
them eat more.
That's true, Salim. Sorry, I should be on message. You're quite right.
Yeah, no, it all leads very well into the next topic. So
Well, Salim, tell us about the power of the technology, but really, what makes the technology that platforms and technology such as yours offer? Why are they critical to making this successful, direct sourcing successful?
yeah, so few things we already touched upon, right? If direct sourcing is about access to quality talent quickly in a cost-effective manner, right? Where it doesn't matter what type of role type skill you're hiring. And if that is the underpinning objective, and then we start looking at each of these five key components, right? Because the moment we talk about five key components, sometimes the audience starts getting concerned about, hey, I don't do marketing today, I don't do curation today, I don't do, but all of those are being done by a staffing provider, right? At a markup and rate that's significantly higher, right? And that varies based on the skill type, role type you're hiring for. So with direct sourcing, if you're trying to do all of those things, then you have to rely on a technology that'll let you do more of those with very few people, right? You don't have to go build a staffing company, right? So then technology becomes a critical piece, and then we can start looking at each of those components, right? So you have talent marketing. So some of the, I'll take a step back. These days, you hear AI in everyone's tagline or company name or in their URL itself. So the key thing to do would be to ask them, okay, hey, in order to do direct sourcing, I need to do marketing, I need to do curation, I need to do recruiting. Well, you are. I mean, you guys are doing a lot of innovative work there, but I'll touch upon these other three things. If those are the three things you're looking at, then help me understand how I can directly source quality talent that's curated in the most cost-effective manner, right? So we'll drill down into each of those and talk about technology advancements there, right? When it comes to talent marketing, you leverage AI in order to identify what are the most effective channels to market to talent. How do you market to talent? When do you market to talent? Right? And the content that gets delivered. All of these are areas where AI plays a role in talent marketing. And the question to ask is, tell me exactly how you do it, right? So what about curation, right? Again, curation is an aspect where you're continuously engaged with talent to ensure the most relevant talent with the right qualifications is available to be readily deployed. So where do you use AI in order to know how to reach talent, when to reach talent, what message resonates with whom? Is it personalized, right? Is the talent that's already in your pool relevant to where your business is going, right? So again, drill down into these aspects of AI, and that's where a lot of advancements happening, right? And then when it comes to recruiting, obviously, there is so much automation that goes in order to pre-screen, pre-vet, schedule, match talent, not just based on a keyword frequency count with the skill description. There's concepts like skills proximity, upskilling rate from where the talent currently is, right? So these are all some of the components that you need to be thinking about. But before you get to any of these, the first question to ask is, hey, you keep talking about talent pools. How do I know what talent pool to build where and how do I build them? Right? So if you don't, that's the whole AI talent pools curation, all that aspect that you introduced when we started the podcast, right? So I think these are some of the technology aspects that you need to be looking at when you're trying to think about direct sourcing and technology. Um, and if you're not able to clearly uh, envision the role of technology in each of these and not have you hire 20 people per each of these components, then you're in the right direction.
And Saleem, your company has been hugely successful in this space. I think it's fair to say. You've got one of the most recognizable brands in the direct sourcing technology sector. I think every conference I go to, I'm always pleased to see you guys. It's always loud, it's vibrant, and very friendly. But when you sit down with a contingent workforce leader or a procurement buyer, and you're talking about your technology, what are the things that they're typically interested in? That they really want to hone in on and understand about your technology? That's question number one. And then question number two is what is the critical success factor or critical success factors around technology and direct source? And I know you've touched on them throughout, but is there one that you'd like to isolate?
Um, yeah, I think you know the I kind of put it in one sentence, but there are three pieces, so I don't think there's one. It's um, timely access to quality talent in a cost efficient manner, right? So basically trying to see, are you able to fill these role types, skill types quickly, and the talent that you present gets hired, and the cost is significantly low compared to sourcing that same talent through your other sourcing avenues, right?
Yeah. And Salim, if we think about the typical large or medium-sized enterprise, most will have some sort of vendor management system, VMS for short,
Mhm.
or an ATS, applicant tracking system, or an associated type of CRM. Like, is it just accepted and implied that companies and technology like yours will are integrated into those sort of technologies and ecosystems? And is that something that often comes up when you're talking about your technology, is about the integration into those technologies and indeed others?
Yeah, absolutely. Integration does come into conversations, right? Because if you talk about driving cost efficiencies, if somebody has to manually look at a rec, create that in a sourcing product, and then submit candidates, and then do interview handling, everything offline, then you're not achieving some of those objectives, right? Then if you're bringing one of those functions in-house, or if somebody else is providing that service, then the cost is going to be higher. Again, that's where, right, I was saying when you're doing your due diligence, the conversation has to be, what is the recruiting automation you have? And if there is enough automation, then you can start having the conversation with the service provider. Why does it cost so much, right? Um, so I think one of the questions you asked, Connor, just earlier, had to do with what comes up when we're talking to procurement, right? And I think one of the things that comes up is this confusion we talked about earlier, because whoever they're talking to is defining it differently, which paints a completely different picture of what is it that this solution is and needs to be doing, right? So we end up spending a lot of time educating on what are the pieces, how does automation fit in, why you don't need an army of people if you're trying to do all of this in-house. If you're trying to do it with a curation partner, looking into automation and trying to make sure the pricing that you're getting is optimal for you, right?
Yeah, thanks, Salim, for coming back on that one. So, Salim, we want to look now at what are the challenges the companies face when launching direct sourcing initiatives. I think I've been in this sector
Mhm.
for quite some time. We've probably got some good learnings to share, but I'm keen, obviously, to hear from you, Salim, as our guest today.
Yeah, so we talked over and over about the confusion created by naming uh, naming conventions and letting the wrong stakeholders guide you, right? And I think what we've seen sometimes is, um, in a given ecosystem, um, if you have someone that's providing staffing services and they also end up being your curation and direct sourcing provider, and your goal is that the pricing structure needs to be, the most optimal pricing structure, what incentive do I have as a staffing provider in your ecosystem to fill your orders through direct sourcing, right? And if I'm viewing direct sourcing as a competing service, right? Where as a staffing provider, I'm charging 40%, and here, you know, it could be in single digits. What motive do I have to provide a good direct sourcing solution, right? So this is a challenge that we see. In some cases, it makes sense because the type of talent you're trying to hire is so specialized, right? And that's why I think one of the things that, again, this is a challenge. At the same time, something to think about is you don't do direct sourcing for all your skill types, role types. There is a specific profile of skill types, role types that you want to start with and then grow and change. So in such an ecosystem where your skills and roles are very unique, trying to do direct sourcing will end up being one where you are relying on your staffing supplier to do direct sourcing, and our recommendation is that's not an ideal fit, right? So educating the market and having this conversation is a challenge that we face, and we have learned enough. WorkLlama has been around for 10 years, and we've been doing direct sourcing for the past 6 years, a lot of it in stealth mode. I mean, we've done a few things together, right? So we have learned a lot, and as a result of that, I'm sharing with you guys what works well, what doesn't work well, right? So the other thing is, companies shouldn't do this as a checklist item because you're hearing it everywhere and your boss is asking about it. Just don't say, hey, okay, I talked to somebody in my staffing stuff. They said they have a database and they're going to go directly hire from me at a low cost. And that's not direct sourcing, right? You're building your own branded private talent community. So don't do it as a checklist item. And again, whenever it's done as a checklist item, it doesn't work well, right? Then the other challenge that we also encounter has to do with branding, right? There is still, I get surprised. I don't think there's been a single implementation where we have not had conversation around branding, right? So if this is an initiative where you're building your own private talent community that is tailored to your business, and talent is a competitive edge, we talked about that in one of our previous podcasts, right? If if that's your objective, just like the way you have employee and employer value proposition for perm workers that reflects your brand persona, you need to have a similar uh, brand persona and employer and employee value proposition, right? And it is very simple to be very clear and explicit in terms of who you're working for, right? The employment arrangement can be made very clear through explicit disclaimers, including a checkbox saying, I understand, I've read this, right? And I think that's where, in order to deal with some of the risks that come in, right? Guys like you, that's what you guys do, right? You guys make sure companies don't get in trouble because of classification, right? So branding becomes one of those pain points. Well, I mean, you're familiar. We were ready to
Yes.
launch, and what happened, right?
Uh,
Last week.
Yeah, a couple of years ago as well, Salim. And if you, I agree that this branding piece, I think, particularly with our experience working in the USA over the years, there seems to be always a concern from the procurement
Mhm.
leadership, or more likely legal, around co-employment. If you create a branded talent community attracting freelancers or independent workers or temporary workers or workers, that there's some sort of co-employment or engagement risk. And I just don't think that argument stacks up. Now, I'm not saying that because I'm a practitioner in this space, and it's in my interest as a business leader to ram that through, but it doesn't stack up. It does not stack up in any way, shape, or form. And I think that's something that um, the companies need to consider carefully when they're going on this journey. In fact, I think it's the biggest one. Make sure that you've got the legal, HR,
Mhm.
procurement stakeholders that can sign this off in the room,
Yeah.
and that you're not about to launch and then suddenly you cannot launch. And I think we learned this to our cost some years ago, Salim, where we were ready to go, and at the very last minute the branding element was pulled, which impacted on our launch. And I mean, with the greatest respect, we're really proud of our company, CXC and WorkLlama. But if you're a candidate in the freelance market, right, and you're going to want to work for big bank A or big entertainment company B or large pharma company C, right? The power of their
Yeah.
brand and logo and billions in marketing dollars over the years is much more meaningful, I think, than a CXC or WorkLlama branded talent pool. And I know we're probably going on about this a bit, but I think for me, that's one of the critical success factors, or not, is getting
Yeah.
that brand piece signed off. And I think the other consideration is around time and business
Mhm.
readiness. And if I can
Yeah.
explain what I mean by time, a really good direct sourcing program will take time to give the
Yeah.
end client that return on investment, those cost savings, and it takes time to build up the talent pool. Yes, of course, you can bring
Mhm.
in known talent from your VMS or your ATS or your database or your Excel spreadsheets or your procure to pay system. Yes, that's it. That's a given. But to do this well and do it successfully, there is a time commitment, and there needs to be, I think, a recognition from the client side that it does take time. But that time, in our view, I think is well worth spending. Salim, would you agree?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it does take time. The one thing that I would like to point out is that doesn't mean when you launch, none of your recs will get filled, right?
Of course,
So
of course.
don't, that's another narrative that'll get sold by the incumbent stakeholders, right? So again, that's also a challenge, right? A lot of misinformation, the current incumbents try to create, and fitting the solution within the current model, right? So no, I agree with you. It takes time, but that doesn't mean you won't be able to fill recs immediately. There's kind of one other thing I just want to touch upon because we're talking about challenges is the operation, the models on how to operationalize it, right? There's no start with one model day zero, right? You should start with knowing that you need these five pieces, and how you operationalize these, be it as a tier zero under an MSP or a parallel, it depends on your organizational maturity. So again, that's part of the solution design professional services that we would work with you to properly define what that solution is, right? So it's not just that, right? Are you under a MSP or are you running it parallel? But there's also the question of which of the three components you bring in-house, right? I'm excluding UR, AOR, and tech because most often you would not bring them in. One being the risk element, the other is you're not a technology company building tech to do this, right? So which of these three pieces you bring in will be another aspect of solution design, right? And then how do you bring it in? You can start with bringing in just one piece or outsourcing all three and gradually bringing them in with time, right? So again, that takes time. and and not having that proper solution design. How does it sit? Which one do you bring in? Which one do you outsource? Causes create some of the challenges that shouldn't be there. Again, this whole process of what I described is not a 2-month activity, right? It's a few conversations, and if you want to get started, give this a go. You start with outsourcing everything, and know that day zero you probably are not going to be achieving whatever the maximum cost benefits are, but it's a roadmap, right? So, we have a graph that talks about cost savings to disruption to existing ecosystem. Your cost savings are low and you're outsourced everything. And as you start bringing things in, your cost savings go up, right?
Which I think is a great point to end that particular conversation piece on. So, Saleem, we're coming to the last question I want to discuss before we look at some of the questions that have come in over the last couple of weeks. And the question really is, how can organizations, Saleem, in your view, ensure that their direct sourcing strategies are future-proof or proofed?
Yeah. So kind of sorry, I keep going back when
No,
we
it's good. It's
move
good.
forward. So
Yes.
one of the other challenges has to do with monetization, right?
Yes.
I know you and I talked about it, but it's a competitive differentiator for some companies. So there are very innovative pricing models that are beyond just, percent of pay rate model that exist and make complete sense for a VMS type offering, but may or may not make sense for a direct sourcing solution. So that's an area of opportunity as well as a challenge, because that sometimes creates hurdle to adoption of the solution.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think that's fair comment, Salim. I think that's where sometimes the confusion comes from, right?
Yeah.
Because often my view on direct sourcing is that it's largely technology led, right? And you're essentially
Mhm.
acquiring access or a license to a technology platform. So most
Yeah.
organizations are used to buying technology on a license basis, right? But if we think
Mhm.
about the history of direct sourcing, it's often been on a contingent or pay per play, right? So every worker
Yeah.
that's placed, there's a fee associated with it, typically for the technology, typically for the curation, and typically for the payroll stroke compliance piece. My view, I think we need to come as a sector to think about more different and more innovative commercial models, just because
Yeah.
it's worked a certain way over the course of a 25 to 30 year lifespan with VMS, MSP, EOR, AOR. In my view, it doesn't always necessarily have to stay that way. And I think
Yeah.
there's a different way to look at that. And I think that's both an opportunity and a challenge to your point, Celine.
Yeah. All right. So
Look into the
future
future, Celine.
proofing.
Yes, please, Celine.
Yeah. Um, Obviously pick good technology, right? And understand the roadmap of the products and not just what they're doing today, right? And if they're not able to clearly articulate a roadmap in each of these 5 elements on how they will drive efficiencies and benefit, e- cost savings, right? Efficiency and effectiveness in each of these avenues, that'll help you move along that curve from everything outsourced to everything being insourced. If you cannot get a clear picture of that, then you may be picking a wrong solution, right? Also, from a technology standpoint, not only understanding the future roadmap, but also making sure that the number of stakeholders that you have in the ecosystem, again, talking purely from a technology standpoint, right? Like you said, this is a technology-driven solution, so I'm going to talk about tech a little bit. Um, is to make sure, are you trying to cobble together and build a quilt, or are you trying to look for one solution that has an end-to-end perspective, right? And also is the solution capable of today doing contingent, but tomorrow taking you to the promised land of total talent acquisition, right? I'm not talking about talent management. I'm talking about total talent acquisition and talent pooling, regardless of employment arrangement. I think we talked about some of this in our previous podcast, right?
Yes, we did.
So you need to look at solutions from that standpoint. So you're setting yourself up for success, right?
Yes.
The other element is, if the purpose of having this branded talent community that's yours is to help you react in a really quick manner to changing market ecosystem. Well, I mean, we had one, what, yesterday or day before with the whole DeepSeek announcement, right? Right. So the world is evolving so fast, right? One of the benefits of direct sourcing is your organizational agility to changing demand and helping you have talent as a competitive edge, right? So, we talked about effectiveness, efficiencies, and cost savings, and now we're talking about enterprise organizational agility and talent as a competitive edge. If that is something that is an underpinning principle of the solution, then it becomes extremely critical to align your workforce strategy with your organizational growth strategy, right? It's no longer, hey, I have 20 IT hiring managers, they need these people, they put the job rec, I'm going to make sure they get filled quickly. That is what the traditional model of sourcing has been, but that's not what it will be, right? And you're starting to see a very close collaboration between talent acquisition and procurement, right? So another thing to future-proof here is having that level of collaboration between your talent ecosystem stakeholders, that's your HR and procurement, but at the same time aligning with your overall organizational strategy, right? Hey, how am I going to grow my business over the next 3 years? Where am I going to grow? What are some of the key strategic initiatives that I'm going to undertake? Again, all of this sounds like you have to do a lot, but it's not a lot if you start actually thinking about it, right?
Yeah.
And another thing to do as part of this exercise is workforce planning and forecasting. This used to be one of your favorite topics. Every time
Yes. It
we
is.
met up at a bar, you would start asking, why is no one doing this? And um, I don't know why, but that is another aspect, right? So you have to look at all these all these four pieces: technology, collaboration between talent, stakeholders, alignment with your corporate growth strategy, and that drives the whole workforce planning and forecasting aspect. And there's some intelligence that goes into it, right? In workforce planning and forecasting. Once you have a perspective on your growth strategy, you can then start developing a strategy around where to source, how to source, and things like that.
Yeah.
So
Saleem, I think that's absolutely bang on. For me, a critical success factor for direct sourcing, but also a future-proof strategy,
yeah.
is getting that demand plan or resource demand
Mhm.
plan or workforce forecast as accurate as it can be. So most companies do it, but I think most companies do not do it well, right? But it's a solvable problem. And I think from my perspective, that can be the force multiplier for really having an
Mhm.
effective, efficient
Yeah.
direct sourcing program that gives the client or the end user that return on investment in line with all the other things we've talked about today. And if you can crack that, for me, that's the one of the big pieces of the code. But you might expect me to say that, Salim. We've known each other a long time.
Yeah.
It's an unusual obsession of mine, but I think it's a key component to
Yeah.
to your point.
Yeah, I think, having a well-defined, robust direct sourcing solution can create a slightly forgiving environment if you're not doing a good job at a few of these other components, right, that we talked about. So I think we're gonna save some time for
Yes.
Q&A, or are
Yeah.
we gonna
We
chat
are.
about anything else
Yeah.
you have on your mind?
Well, Salim, this is great. We got some questions that came in ahead, but I'm just going to open the floor to our audience, and if anyone has a question, guys, please raise your hand on the chat function, and we'll come to you. Okay. Don't think we've anyone with their hands up, Saleem. So maybe we'll take some of the questions that came in last week. Is that okay, Saleem?
Yep.
Good stuff. So first question that came in was, I think we've addressed this, Saleem, but let's just give the answer. So how can organizations measure the return on investment, ROI, of direct sourcing initiatives effectively? Are there specific KPIs that should be tracked?
Well, the simplest one is, what's your cost per hire through a direct sourcing channel compared to other channels you've been using to source, right? It's a very simple and obvious measure, which fits very well with one of the goals that the procurement teams almost always have, right? How much did I reduce in my contingent spend? Um, and the other things to look at is, the other things that you want to look at is the growth in your talent community, right? Um, the volume of recs that get filled through your direct sourcing channel. The typical metrics that you apply to any of your staffing sourcing channels or your MSP programs, those are all relevant here, right? And you need to aspire to do better in those. And some of it takes time, like you said, right? It's not a day zero because the solution provider is not going out and buying a database of 500,000 resumes to do it, right? Because this is where you're building your own curated talent pool. But initially, in order to meet your requirements, you can supplement through these other avenues. But all those other metrics apply. But I think the number one would be, are you getting quality talent in the most cost-effective manner is the key key performance metric you want to pay close attention to.
Yeah, I agree. Salim, I'd probably add two things. They're probably obvious to most of our audience and indeed ourselves, but I think it's time to hire, right? How long does it take to get
Mhm.
that,
Yep.
to get that person job ready and
Yep.
productive and working? And the second one is around it's relevant for the talent experience. And I think we could spend a whole webinar talking about the cruciality of talent
Mhm.
experience and how important that needs to be. And without
Yep.
giving you guys too much of a plug, Salim, that's something that I think your platform is very thoughtful about and that was built into the design on the design thinking around that. But for me, it's that net promoter score. So how's the
Mhm.
talent experiencing direct sourcing? Do they enjoy it? Are they enjoying all the multiple touch points, the compliance part, the technology part, the payroll part? And if that's integrated and what that experience is, I think the NPS and that experience tracking around that is of crucial importance just in terms of KPIs. Again, I've probably failed the so what test on that. So Salim, we've got another question, which is really interesting, actually, in my view, and hope our audience will find the same. What are some of the unexpected pitfalls companies encounter when scaling direct sourcing strategies across multiple regions? I think we might have
Mhm.
you here, Salim, but I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, so I mean, this is a problem that, we if we look at each of the pieces that we talked about, right? Uh, marketing is going to be different in the um, different markets you're trying to attract and build talent, right? It's around messaging and the whole personalization component and talent experience you talked about, just from that aspect of it, right? Curation, again, where you have ready to deploy talent is another area where you'll start seeing complexities, right? Because the way the way you learn, upskill, and be ready to deploy, or the licenses and permits that are required to do a certain type of job, they vary based on geographies, right? And then obviously the compliance around, hey, after you work, I don't know, 90 hours, you need to go out for 3 days and then come back again. Those kind of things that exist, which from a compliance standpoint, you guys do a fantastic job, right? So those are all things that you need to be looking at. And purely from a technology standpoint, localization, multi-language support, those are all table stakes. I'm not going to talk about, which you should be familiar, but it's around marketing and talent experience, curation, and then all the compliance aspects of it, right? And there's a lot of different things that come into play there as well. In certain markets, people don't like to receive any voice calls or text messages after a certain point in time. Some regions, even the tools that are used are different. Some tools are banned in certain countries. So if you use messaging in one country, you can't use it in another. So yeah, it could get complex, but again, working with the right partner, you can address these. I also don't think of these as something that'll take 2 years to address, right? These are all part of that planning and solution design.
Yeah, I agree that probably two additional comments would be based on our experience of going global for direct sourcing, MSP, EOR. I think the same
Mhm.
challenges or pitfalls apply, and that's really when it's moving from, let's say, North America to Western Europe and Eastern Europe down into APAC and ANZ. It's really around, has the business in that local region bought into it, right? Have they been on that journey with the sponsor from, let's say, America or Berlin or wherever that person or they are based. So I think it's that business buy-in, and then aligned to that, Saleem, it's really the business readiness for the change that will come, and if they've got the
Yeah.
adequate resources in place to actually ensure that that change can be communicated and implemented, of course. But I think that's something we've covered the branding piece and just making sure that all
Yeah.
the appropriate stakeholders are aligned, whether it's HR, legal, contingent, or all, or TA, whatever that is. But I think that's a key piece of the puzzle, making sure that those stakeholders and influencers are identified and communicated with throughout the process, right? Even if you're not
Yeah.
going to be going into Western Europe or Eastern Europe or APAC or ANZ for a year, that they're aware and that they're on that journey. Because if they're not, it's problematic when you really want to start the program, or at least begin the initial phases of it. We've got 3 minutes left, Saleem, and um, I think we've got time for one question. This question, I quite like it. I'm afraid of what the answers are, but let's go with it anyway. Um,
Okay.
Salim, in your view, which industries are leading the way in adopting direct sourcing, and what can other companies in other sectors learn from their adoption of direct sourcing?
So the point of view we have is it should be industry agnostic, more around role type, skill type, right? But we are seeing, from our customer, the mix of customers we are seeing, the early adopters have been healthcare, pharma, right? Which I heard is a similar journey for VMSs. That's where they were the first to adopt. And if you think about it, it's interesting because they're very, very conservative in everything they do, right? They test everything to the T. But anyway, so that's that's a sector where we see a lot of adoption. The next is financial services. Again, very conservative in everything they do, but it's interesting they're embracing a new solution much faster. So pharma, financial services, oil and gas, media and entertainment are the four that we're seeing a lot of adoption. Um, and tech companies are starting to pick this up, but not as much as these other four segments. That's where there's a lot of traction.
Interesting, Salim. Thanks so much. So, Salim, we've come to the end of our webinar. We've got just a final piece here for our audience, and we'd like to thank our audience for joining us today. And Salim, may I thank you for your time and also for showcasing and sharing your experience and expertise in this space. It's always a pleasure. To our audience, guys, thanks so much for joining us today. I hope you found it beneficial, and I hope it will help you as you consider the next stage of your direct sourcing journey. So, for those in Europe, have a good evening, and for those in America and the USA, enjoy the rest of your day. Salim, thank you, and thanks again.
Thanks, Connor. Take care. Have a good one, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.